that we're having to switch turbines off at certain times of the day because we just don't have anywhere to put the energy. This obsession with putting more and more into a grid that cannot cope, we've got to be more obsessed by finding ways to utilize that energy until we get to this point of finding places where we can put energy when we don't need it and then return it to the grid when we do need it, is the obvious thing.
Hello everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Sustainable Podcasts. On this show, we explore the intersection of nature, humanity, and society. We bring you lighthearted yet thought-provoking conversations and share sustainability success stories that inspire positive climate action from individuals, communities, businesses across the world. I can assure that you get value for your time by learning practical tips on how to replicate good and simple practices that bring you the satisfaction of contributing to a peaceful planet, thriving communities, and of course, profitable economic endeavors. Right, we have a very accomplished personality on the show today, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you Jason Howlett. Jason is the Chief Executive Officer of Energy Storage Association here in the UK. He's a respected global leader in the renewable energy sector with over 15 years of experience across multiple continents of the world. You hear more about Jason and the work that he does, and his perspectives on climate change and sustainability in the next 60 minutes of this show. Jason, you're welcome. You want to say hello to our audiences across the world?
Hi, okay, yeah, thank you for inviting me, and hello everybody.
Great. So we'll get started right away, Jason. Let me pick it up from your varied experiences in this sector. Now, you've worked across biogas, hydro, solar, and now batteries. Why do you see energy storage as the linchpin of the clean energy transition? Why is it a thing for you right now?
It's been a real challenge for several years, and a real frustration of mine that we have this obsession with generation and clean power generation, which is absolutely the correct thing. We need to produce more renewable energy from the solar, tidal, wind, any resource that is sustainable. We should be utilizing. But I think we all know that these are varied in their generation. We don't get much solar at night, for example, and on the calm days and when the wind turbines aren't going, then we don't get anything from those either. So we know we have variability, but we also know that we have at some point some level of generation being able to go. But what we've seen is this. Already that we're having to switch turbines off at certain times of the day because we just don't have anywhere to put the energy. We have occasions where solar farms are being derated. So this obsession with putting more and more into a grid that cannot cope, we've got to be more obsessed by finding ways to utilize that energy in a positive way that we can reuse that at a later point. So storing it effectively. And there's a range of technology then that can come into play, but I think until we get to this point of finding places where we can put energy when we don't need it, and then return it to the grid when we do need it, is the obvious thing. And we've seen this, and I did a piece recently with Utility Week, an article on Australia, and Australia have gone down this route. We can learn so much from what Australia's already done. So Australia had this mass increase in solar generation. It's got a great climate for solar, but we're already seeing now at points where they've just introduced legislation in 2 states to potentially put a solar tax, as it's called, basically negative export pricing. So if you discharge to the grid and export to the grid between 10 and 3 or 4 in the afternoon, you can potentially be charged to export electricity. Now, there's no plans to do that in the UK because we're not quite at that level. But what Australia's now found is they've just got too much energy at certain times of the day, so they don't want it. So you'll be penalised unless you put storage in. They've also just done $2.5 billion, so it's roughly about $1.25 billion pounds in subsidies to allow retrofit batteries because they now recognize that adding more and more solar generation into the mix doesn't help. You've got to now put storage into there, and an embedded generation behind the meter generation, storage in people's homes is great because you're spreading that load across the grid. So, you know, we've there's lessons to learn. We know we're on the same path unless we do something else. We've got to change that narrative from just thinking about how we generate energy to how we utilize that energy, store it for when we do need it, and think more cohesively in a more rounded way.
Just let's bring this down to brass tacks, to everybody, to households, individuals, small businesses, everyone. I mean, everyone's basically powered by energy, right? So great example in Australia. But how does this whole advocacy for energy storage, how does it impact on the bottom line for households, for individuals? What is the end game really? Why should citizens, be interested and support this advocacy and this move towards energy storage that you're promoting?
It's a really good question, because this is one of there's two challenges here. You've got groups of people who can afford this and can do it. So it's quite interesting. A few years back, we saw a real increase post the war in Ukraine, COVID. Some people had more disposable income. You weren't able to go on holiday. You weren't able to go out to restaurants and spend money. We all had to stay at home, as we know. And people were saving money, and we got it to record levels of savings. And I was actually talking to my uncle during this period, and I said, rather than having the money in the bank at 3-4% return, put it on your roof. If you've got spare money, invest in solar, invest in storage. And he did just that. And I was with him actually only last month, and he still thanks me for recommending that, because you've got this positioning where batteries and solar are typically paying back within about 4, 5, maybe 6 years, depending on your energy bill and how you're utilizing it. Batteries alone, which you don't have to put solar on your house, will probably pay back in 3 and 4 years. And this is really quite an interesting, because you've got this situation where, I'll use my own example. I buy electricity overnight at around 7 pence. I put them into my batteries that I've got at the side of my house, and I'll use winter as a good example because I don't generate much solar in the winter. My house runs from the batteries, and I generate a few kilowatt hours from my solar panels in winter. But typically I'm running my house off the power I buy at night at 7 pence and then utilize that. The standard rate is 24, 25 pence at the moment. But I don't do that. I'm able to power. So I can reduce my energy bill to less than a third of what it is because I've got a battery at the side of my house. Now in summer, I generate solar from my roof. When I first installed the panels, the idea was that I maximized my self-consumption. And so you were getting 4 pence for export and you were still buying it at 26p. So the best thing to do was fill your batteries with your own electricity and use it. You didn't export. But what we've seen with the change in tariffs over the last year, that you can export at 15 pence. So what I'm doing now, I'm charging my batteries at night at 7p. I'm exporting all my electricity at 15p. I empty my batteries at night in the evening when the grid needs it, and then I fill my batteries back up at day. So I'm actually running this house where I live. I'm running 2 electric vehicles, and in summer I actually make money. And this is keeping up to date with the power of a battery. Now, what I say, that's the group that can afford it. You've got a group that potentially could afford it, with some sort of monthly means of doing it. And there's various companies out there now that are looking at trying to make that easier for homeowners to spread the cost. So spending £10,000 in one lump sum is a challenge. But if you can spread that over a period of time with either a leasing type arrangement or a financing arrangement, then that again makes it more accessible. So it's exactly the same, but you've got a financing option. And then finally, you've got this group of people who just genuinely can't afford it. We talk a lot about people who are genuinely struggling with the cost of living. Inflation is still rising. So we've got to think about how we really help people who are genuinely struggling to pay their energy bills. The people who are making those tough choices over how they're feeding their family. They're not thinking about can they invest in these sort of things. They just don't have that spare cash. And this is one of the things where myself and the Energy Storage Association are trying to work with government to find those solutions to really help make this accessible to everybody, because there's a lot of the payback and the economics that sit behind this. It works for investors, and there are a number of companies out there who are trying to work with social housing providers and charities to go, right, how do we help people get access to this technology? And the benefits won't be as great, but they'll have some benefits because it's all being funded for them. It's like zero cost upfront for them, and they might save 20% on their electricity bill rather than saving 2/3 that I'm talking about. But if that opens that up to everybody, and the funding is being done for them, then you've got some great opportunities. And these are some of the things that we're trying to lobby with government, trying to work with the private sector, trying to work with GB Energy to look at all these elements and make the technology accessible for all. Because one of my core values is fairness. I massively believe in that we have to treat people fairly. And at the moment, this technology is very much for the middle class. Who can afford it? How do we make that available to everybody? And that is a real driving mission of ours at the Energy Storage Association, is making technology, making energy savings, helping the government deliver on its mandate to lower energy bills by £200 a year that was in its manifesto, because we believe it's quite possible with this technology at zero upfront costs. So lobbying hard with government, lobbying hard with GB Energy, and coming up with those solutions is really, really important.
Yeah, Jess, there's a lot to unpack, right? Listening to you, I see lots of benefits for the everyday person, savings, even earnings, right? Possibilities for earnings, and doing good stuff for sustainability. And this is what we do on the show, the sustainability success stories. I mean, there's so much to say about it. But let me bring you back to your work at the ESA, respect to, interfacing with government, right? What's the role of policy and legislation, in getting this to move forward? And what is it that you're targeting, you're wanting government to do? Because clearly these benefits, they speak for themselves. People can embrace them and do them. But of course, you have really need for support. For empowerment. This energy poverty and a whole lot of things. But so, what should government do? What should policy do in this regard?
First and foremost, it's recognizing what role storage has to play, because when you look at a house and you look at its energy rating, if you have solar on your roof, it helps the energy rating of your property. If you have a battery, it doesn't, but yet you can access the greener energy with that. So again, recognizing the technology for what it does and what it brings is a key aspect, but actually making it part of future policy. So I've been working with DESNZ, Department of Energy Security Net Zero, including a project with Mayata Farnborough, the minister, one of the energy ministers there, and we've been looking at the Warm Homes Plan. That is due out in probably October, November this year. And I'm very optimistic that we'll start to see batteries recognised and storage recognised for what it is and how it can help. So this is the real first, I think, test of what we're starting to see, that battery technology is being understood more and more. And the work that we continue to do at the ESA is promote that and the benefits and how that works. So in the Warm Homes Plan, that is really trying to help tackle energy poverty and the retrofit of technology into homes is really, really important. But what we see with the future home standards on new builds, we've seen over the last couple of years solar start to be introduced as we're looking at CO2 offsetting in new build. a 31% reduction, we're now starting to see that move to mandatory solar on a new build. But we're not seeing mandatory storage on the new build. So we can still put in basic technology that can generate electricity and continue to add to the problem, rather than mandating all homes. If we put a battery on every home that, say for argument's sake, costs £1,000, all homes go up. One house builder will not do it on their own. But if all new homes were at that level, spreading that cost across your mortgage is just gone, because you will save more on your electricity bill. And working then with the mortgage providers to help them understand that with this technology, that the new homeowner will get lower energy bills, therefore they can pay a little bit more on their mortgage, and it offsets, because the overall benefit is better for the homeowner. If you move into a house with solar and batteries onto that property, you will save a lot more on your energy bill than solar alone. Absolutely. So these are the sort of areas. But you've got, again, lobbying hard for things like salary sacrifice. VAT removal was implemented on batteries a couple of years ago, but that's only temporary. How do we extend that to help people invest in this technology? But also, you can buy or lease a car on salary sacrifice, an EV car. Why not electric technologies like batteries and solar and the like, that people on their homes can invest with those sort of incentives? So there's a range of different legislation that's coming out, that has come out, that's really in this space. We've just seen the flexibility roadmap been released by DESNZ, which again is really thinking about storage technology and how it helps the grid in times of duress. And then valuing those assets. So if you make your battery available for people to use when the grid is in duress, you'll be rewarded, and lock in those rewards a little bit more, so you have more certainty, because at the moment they're really arbitrary in terms of what you will get. So if the battery can help the grid balance out for frequency, then you may get some money. If in winter, particularly in that winter peak, 4 till 6, 4 till 7 in the evening, we consume so much more energy than we have. If you release your energy, you can get rewarded more, and up to sort of £4 a kilowatt hour that you can sell that energy back for. But it's very varied in terms of the event and severity. But locking in more of a benefit that people go, right, if you make your battery available to the grid, you'll get £50 a year, or whatever that number is. But you know what that is, and then how many times it's used is just down to the grid operators. But these are the sort of things that the flexibility roadmap starts to bring in. So I think over the last 2 years, like I say, I've been really lobbying and pushing hard for battery storage, wanting the industry to be represented. And when the opportunity came for me to create this, we've already been doing a lot of work, even though the Energy Storage Association itself is relatively new. The activities we've been pushing over the last couple of years, I think, are starting to bear fruits. But as we collectively come together, I think we've got a great opportunity to really move that on at a scale.
Yeah, so really, would you say is the mandatory elements and the incentives provided for solar and hydro, maybe by governments, and leaving out storage and batteries, would you say that was an oversight, or you would say, okay, perhaps that's the progression towards as the industry grows, as renewables begin to show more opportunities and promises, we can take this on gradually? What's the position for you? Was it an oversight, the part of policy, or let's take these things as they evolve?
I don't necessarily know it was oversight. I think people just weren't aware, and it's kind of like it's one of those things, because people talk about generating the energy from solar. Everyone was, like I say, obsessed, and still is to an extent, generate clean energy, and it's in the early days, it's you don't even have to think about it. It was so small, the amount of energy we're generating. And nobody was thinking in that sense of longer term, and looking around the countries who hadn't yet encountered the problem, like Australia, who were probably one of the most advanced in their thinking in terms of renewables, and we're probably a couple of years behind them. But it's kind of one of those things, it's been building, and people haven't necessarily been pushing it. And this is why, like I say, probably over 2 years ago, I was really advocating storage, and I've been lobbying hard the previous government, the current government, to really think about this and think about the future. Most governments, are only unfortunately thinking on 5-year horizons, and because they want to be re-elected. Energy needs a longer term planning, and I think for me it has to be more cross-party. The unfortunate thing is you see current political parties trying to polarize debate on clean technology, which is an interesting conversation. But we know, just from purely economics, forget the term net zero, but we know from economics, clean energy is the most affordable energy out there. And it's and there's numerous studies out there that demonstrate that. So we know it's the most cost effective. Forget the green element and all this other that people in different elements will try and debate and try and distract. We've got to keep pushing this, but people haven't recognised the building challenge. I think this current government understands it more. I think they're starting to get it more. They certainly were listening when in opposition, and I had meetings with Ed Miliband when he was the Shadow Secretary of State for a good couple of hours. They're listening, they're starting to understand, and I think we're starting to see the benefits of that coming through in policy. I've got a lot more optimism that the current government gets it, and that really bodes well. But I think it's just been one of those elements that it's not been a problem. People haven't been thinking longer term enough.
Right. Yeah. I'll come back to the polarization, of the debates of around net zero and all of that in debates. But let me stay on this point around batteries again. Energy storage requires, it's all around batteries, right? And the infrastructure, the technology, the applications, they have very far-reaching implications, you'd agree, Jason, for resource extraction. And again, this is like going back to where we are running from, extraction. We're moving away from fossil, but we're extracting battery minerals that, of course, have the implications for climate change, for communities, and all of that. So how do we, mitigate the negative consequences, that are associated with this, so we don't create one problem in trying to move away or solve another one?
It's certainly one of those elements that come in, and again, people need to keep up to date, because one of the earliest elements, and it's probably disappeared over the last 12 months, but 12 months ago people were talking about cobalt extraction, nickel extraction, and the challenges that go with those. And there's certainly been a lot of challenges in certain countries with child labour, and it's well documented in places like DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, extracting cobalt. And it comes down into efficacy as that sits behind that. I've always worked with companies who've used lithium. I've never worked with nickel, manganese, cobalt battery technologies. We've started to see even those that were using them shift away from using them into lithium. So yes, there's some historic challenges that were going around NMC technology. Like I say, I've only ever worked with companies who used LFP, lithium iron phosphate, which doesn't have necessarily those same challenges, but you're still extracting it. Yep. And you're still looking at ways of extracting. But as we see technologies progress, we're now moving into sodium ion technologies and sodium cells. And these are starting to be introduced both in vehicle manufacturing as technologies come on. And what we're starting to see constantly is extracting minerals is expensive. So if you're digging any mineral out the ground, it's expensive. And let's face it, everything we have usually comes from anything that's steel is dug out the ground. And this comes into one of those debates where people go, if you have a battery car, it's all those minerals in the battery. Well, guess what? The car itself was minerals, iron ore at some point. Don't obsess about something. The engine is metal. Everything in your car has probably come out the ground at one point in its life. And so these are the sort of challenges that people have got to start to think about. But as extracting minerals is expensive, so we see a huge push in recycling, as we have done, but we see that emergence of newer technologies as we've moved 10 years ago, where NMC technology was probably at the heart of it. Over the last, that was migrating into LFP, lithium iron phosphate. We're now starting to see the emergence of sodium ion, and literally, without a chemistry lesson, we've got oceans full of sodium. It's not a difficult mineral to get out the ocean. So these are the sort of things that we start to see, because it's just the economics. As technologies evolve, the density of sodium ion cells has been too small. Therefore, the battery pack is too large. If you want to store energy in a sodium cell, you've had to look at much bigger batteries than you would for LFP. And prior to that, it was much bigger than NMC. The most dense was NMC. LFP technology moved on to get denser and more dense cells. We're seeing that evolution starting to happen in sodium. You're starting to see the development of solid state batteries. So technology and economics always drives technology. And if things can be done more cost effective, which generally means less extraction, then we're into a good way. And we're seeing a lot more capability to recycle as well being generated into the economy. Because one of the things I've always been against, and this was again a few years back, and I'm not hearing it as much, is repurposing batteries. That to me, and this is my own comment, was when our batteries are kind of running out a bit and they're not quite as good, we'll send them to another country to have the problem, but we'll tell them that they're giving it. So if there's an emerging economy that this battery used to store 10 kilowatt hours, now it's only really working at 5 kilowatt hours, well, we'll send it somewhere else and then they can deal with the problem at the end of it. Repurposing batteries doesn't necessarily work unless you've got an afterthought to what you're going to do for recycling. So yeah, I think mineral extraction and really, and when I was at Give Energy and the global CEO there, we looked at the full carbon impact of our cells and batteries. And I think having that transparency in terms of being very open, in terms of, yes, it is what it is, but we extract, we're always extracting minerals and stone. In the UK alone, goodness knows how many quarries there are, and I've worked in industries that's extracting minerals and metals and the like. That is unfortunate. We don't move unless we utilize resources, but we've got to keep recycling those resources. We can't just and that's sustainability is very much about not depleting resources where we have nothing. That's the most important part of it.
So improvements in technology, help to mitigate, the consequences or negative effects of extraction you talk about. So why does that not apply to fossil fuel, where you could use, the arguments, carbon capture, storage and all of that technology, to minimize or mitigate the influence? So why is the advocacy heavy on move away from fossil, keep the oil, keep the resources in the ground, and, but you're extracting minerals and all of that you spoke about. And now you see that renewed push, drill, baby drill, and it's spreading. And we're going to talk about the local dialectics, here in the UK. What's your opinion on that renewed push, for drilling of oil? You look at it, the potentials are there, the minerals are there, leave it in the ground, and then there is energy poverty, and then there are many possibilities that, improved technology can help to mitigate. What's your take generally in this big picture, on this big picture?
So my personal take is I'm an environmentalist. I've spent my whole career pretty much in environmental areas, but I'm actually a pragmatist as well. We are on a pathway to changing the energy mix, but that you can't just switch overnight. There is no way we can go from an oil-based economy to a sort of carbon-free economy. It just cannot happen overnight. That is a period of transition. So we have to be realistic and say, yes, we still need coal, we still need oil for the next 5, 10, 20 years. until other resources come on board. And actually, I'm still an advocate of we've still got our own resources in the ground. We've still got coal and the like. So my personal opinion is very much, rather than import these resources and claim they're different to what they are, then we should extract our own. Because from a whole life costing and jobs and economy, for me, we have this crazy situation where we import wood from North America, put it on diesel ships, and burn it in power stations still, which we then claim is renewable technology, and it's renewable energy. It's not renewable energy. Burning wood from North America, that's just not sustainable. But actually, if we dug our own coal out that's in the ground in Northumberland or somewhere for the next 5 years, and we burnt that, if we need to burn something, I'd much rather we were burning our own resources and looking at these elements. So I think it's really interesting, because I was reading a report on oil, and we are expecting over the next 2 years a massive surplus of oil, because the OPEC nations are going to be increasing extraction. Oil prices are going to continue to decrease, and it kind of my own thoughts were very much, is this kind of like a bit of a last minute panic? We know oil is going to disappear, so let's extract what we can, sell it as fast as we can, because in 5 years the market for oil is probably going to be much, much lower than it ever was. And this is why I think you have so much negative press about decarbonisation, because there are huge companies around the world with billions and trillions even of pounds and dollars invested into this, that stand to lose a huge amount of money if we move away from a sort of a carbon oil based economy. So I think nothing is simple in energy, and I think again, it's one of those things. For me, I think sustainability is always about you're looking after your own community, your own climate, in that sense of economic climate. And I think this is where I think we just got to be pragmatic. We're building nuclear power stations. That's another debate over the longevity and the cost of energy. But if they can provide the base load, and we can manage that with nuclear fission, as well as which is being talked about with small batch reactors, then all of these things blend and come to a solution. But I think we've got to be pragmatic, because we can't just say there's no gas, there's no oil. We know we need gas, we know we need it. But again, thinking of gas, and it's one of the things there is in the ESA, that hydrogen is really starting to come into, and I was talking with Durham University this week about the plans for storing hydrogen. We store gas, we have gas storage. Why don't we store hydrogen in salt caverns under the ocean? That when we have all this excess generation, we convert that into hydrogen and burn that in a power station. Because Germany is doing this now with gas-fired power stations basically running off hydrogen, and we have that capability too. So all of these things, like I say, there's so many different solutions that you transition across to, but we've got to get there. We don't just jump overnight.
Let me keep you a bit on this dialectics, right? I approach your approach to take a middle ground position, balancing the environment and the economics. Bit of this, and we transition gradually, right? But we in a situation of extremities, right? You have two extremes. Keep it on the ground, keep it buried. Now, keep extract it all until you have it all, and it's clearly showing in the political dialectics here in the UK, new political tendencies. I don't want to, be specific, I'm talking about, so how do we, and it does seem like that middle ground approach, some moderation, I think is the way to go. How do we get this to permeate in the policy and political circles so that it doesn't become, a touch point of politics where, net zero, I don't want to hear of it, but we need it at some point, in some way. So what is the balancing that we can have? You are not a politician, but you're already kind of working within that space. So what's your way out of this?
I actually don't see one, because I think the current government is very much anti extraction of anything else, which again at times I applaud the sentiment and I applaud the will, but it's the obsession by moving to some position loses some pragmatism, and then you see other parties sort of being completely the other way. We'll scrap everything to do if it's got the term net zero, carbon neutral, whatever. We'll scrap the whole lot of it, and so you've seen this very strong political divide that I actually don't see anyone being pragmatic. So I actually can't see a solution for this pragmatism. So I think we are going to have inefficient, increased carbon, bad for the economy, bad for the environment solutions, because nobody wants to tread that middle ground. We are either this side or we are this side. We are either absolute for the environment, absolute, nothing will come between the roadmap, and we will force the clean roadmap and clean power roadmap, which go brilliant. Without that obsession, we wouldn't actually probably achieve it. If we allowed the creeping in of other things, maybe we'd never reach the end goal. So if you really want to achieve something, you've got to be obsessed about getting to that point. But actually, we know there's got to be a path. Now, if somebody generated a true roadmap and said, to get from where we are today to where we want to be, we know there's got to be some burning of coal. There's got to be in the furnaces. There's got to be keeping, some base load capability. Now, what's the least impactful, both economically and environmentally, solution to get there? So burning other people's gas, is that the right thing? Well, it might be. And, we've got the gas interconnectors. So burning gas that comes in from Europe may well be the challenge. But we know we've got issues there with what's going on in Ukraine with Russia. We can't necessarily depend on gas. So the solution probably, I remember this dash for gas and building gas power stations 20 years ago. That was kind of like the solution, but not thinking the sort of longer term. But we know we've got a place like Drac still burning stuff that is being imported from the US. That's not sensible in my eyes. So how do you get that sort of position? So I actually can't see a path, and if we had to choose one path, I'd rather be on the path that we're on. But I just wish there was more pragmatism. But I accept also that if you have pragmatism, that could be seen as a bit of a cop-out, and you won't get to where you want to as quick as you should. So, this is why I wouldn't want to be a politician, because it's so difficult.
Unfortunately, Jason,
it's easy for me.
You're throwing the mix in there already, and you have to deal with both strands of the political divide, and in order to push your agenda through, So let's keep you away from politics and get back to ESG, matters and all of that, But for the sake of our audience, we'll take a short break to bring what we call sustainable data dive, some bite-sized information that gives you short and sharp tips, on what's going on in the world of energy transition, sustainability, and climate change, facts and figures that enable you to take informed decision making in your business, in your communities, and in your personal lives. We usually take that in a minute or two, and then we get back to the show.
Over the last decade, the global energy market has been shifting fast. This chart tells the story. On the left, fossil fuel investments peaked at $1.37 trillion in 2015. But by 2020, hit by the pandemic and changing policies, they dropped by more than $400 billion, leveling off at about $1.1 trillion in 2024. On the right, clean energy tells a very different story. Starting at just $393 billion in 2015, it more than doubled to $771 billion by 2024, with the biggest jump in 2023. One glance shows it clearly. The future of energy is moving from fossil fuels to renewables.
So Jason, good to have you back on the show. I like that you advocate a middle ground approach to the debate around energy transition. And I think that's the way to go. And I think it's really helpful for the advocacy that you're seeking to achieve with the Energy Storage Association. So now let's talk about the ESA, the work that you do. Why is the ESA necessary at this stage? What are the short, medium, and long-term objectives that you seek to achieve?
Yeah, this comes back into what we was touching on before. Very much the lack of understanding of what we want to do. So bringing together, when I created this idea, when I was CEO of Give Energy, a large battery storage manufacturer, this real understanding of the challenges that go with this, and so the deep frustration that people just weren't understanding it became part of the lobbying. I spoke to a guy called Mark Coyle a couple of years back, and I thought Mark could actually get the ESA. He's the guy that could run this. Unfortunately, Mark wasn't able to, and I decided, right, I'll do it myself. So I felt so strongly about it. So I was working hard with a number of different organisations to help give me, I suppose, the confidence that this was required. So Give Energy being one of them, Powerbolt and SunSync, who are battery manufacturers based here in the UK. We've got Keele University in Staffordshire, Durham University, and Octopus Energy. All are sort of happy to put their time or money into helping this get off the ground. So they put in some money as sort of founders. Getting the bank account up and running for a trade body is just the most difficult thing in the world. A business bank account is difficult. A trade body, because a trade body is not for profit. There are no shareholders, and it's called limited by guarantee. So a limited by guarantee company basically means the directors guarantee the company, only to £1. It's not a crazy thing. So, but bank accounts for limited by guarantee companies are very difficult to get going. So it took me 3 or 4 months, which delayed the launch because you can't do anything. I got a commitment from companies to put money in to kick it off. And that just didn't. I just couldn't invoice because I had nowhere to put the money. So I was doing everything off my own back to start with, and then we finally got the bank out and was able to go. So we launched in June. Effectively started putting a little bit of money in. My wife did all the website, and she's done all the sort of social media bits. So she does that all in her own time as well. She works full time, but so she's been investing a huge amount of time. I put all my time into doing this. I don't charge the ESA. This is purely voluntary from my perspective because I feel so passionate about it. So, the whole thing was very much around, right, we've got some like-minded people, we've got academics, we've got energy companies, we've got battery manufacturers. So we've got a real broad cross-section. Adam Joji, the MP for Newcastle-under-Lyme in Staffordshire, was incredibly supportive. So Adam, when I was at Give Energy, Adam was our local MP. Got to know Adam extremely well, fantastic guy, really helped, and he said, I've got somebody who could really help move that forward for you. So he introduced me to Baroness Berger. So we brought Luciana Berger on as our chair. So she's now she's just been introduced into the House of Lords this past year, but a former climate change shadow minister. So when Ed Miliband was leader of the Labour Party, so again, very well connected, very well informed. When I first had my conversation with Luciana, she understood it, she knew it, and it was like, wow, it's great to think of a politician that really does understand it. She's no longer an MP. She left a few years back, but it's but being in the sort of House of Lords and understanding it really helps that cause. So we've got a very strong focus on several areas. The interoperability and so working with Whitehall departments. Department of Business and Trade, Department of Energy Security, Net Zero, Treasury, and all these, and working them with the wider stakeholders, NESO, National Grid, Ofgem. So trying to support them and help them, give them one point to come to is massively important. Even before we'd formally launched, I was attending events as ESA, even though ESA wasn't even really live. We created the company and everything, but I was attending events because they wanted a point of contact. So being the point of contact that we're able to now do for many different organizations to represent the storage sector is really, really important, and they've embraced that. So being the point that they can engage with industry is really important. So that's definitely one. Advocating the more longer term perspective of storage in all its forms, be it electrical, thermal, hydro, hydrogen based, is really, really important that we start to keep informing people of the benefits and why it should be really understood and part of a future energy strategy. There's another work stream about cybersecurity, because again, one of the big areas that we're talking about with interoperability of these assets working together, when they work together for good, they're incredibly powerful. What we have to be very conscious of, and there's a huge amount of work going on with government and government departments, is thinking that we can't allow access to that from a rogue nation state, for example, because again, all of these, the ability to destabilize our energy system becomes greater. So security behind these assets and that they're all working for the common good is really, really important. And then safety. Again, one of the other big challenges we see from many of our new members, there's many safety challenges and preconceived ideas that don't understand how technology has changed. So people are paranoid about lithium-ion battery fires because some little Billy's e-scooter blew up on outside. That's completely separate, and caused a fire in a flat. It's completely separate to what actually happens with home storage. It's just night and day in terms of what goes on, because the safety features in storage are the battery management system that sits in there, the controls. These are very sophisticated bits of kit. They're not low cost, cheap crap basically being put on that has no overheat protection or no protections built in that then allow this. So you see these misnomers, but again, making the technology available for all. So we want to see a fair and just energy transition that works for everybody going forward. So it's quite, I suppose, quite nebulous, quite vague in that sense of, but if everyone can benefit and everyone's energy bills are lower, then energy storage has to be a part of that in all its different forms. So that's our ultimate goal, that we can help people lower energy bills, move away from that carbon-based economy, and have a more sustainable future.
So in a sense, this is relatable to tackling energy poverty, I believe, yeah?
Yes, and that's massively important to me. Like I say, I feel, I suppose a more stereotypical middle class, person. But I didn't grow up in that. I grew up, in a very, very working class background, and I know how difficult that is, and how difficult that is growing up. But we know that one of the biggest challenges with health is actually warm, dry properties. And I also work with a community energy trust. I'm a director at Staffordshire Community Energy. And they've done a real great program with Stoke-on-Trent University Hospital, where putting solar on the hospital has generated excess funds that they're working then with a local charity called Beat the Cold, to help people who are coming out of hospital make sure they're in energy efficient homes. So putting solar and batteries onto a number of homes from the profits that have come from putting solar on the hospital. So it's not about reducing, it has reduced a little bit the energy bill at the hospital, but there's also the benefits that have come out of that. And they've done a study with the hospital that shows the dramatic health benefits of letting people come out of hospital into a warm, dry home that's not got mold, that's not got condensation. So if you can do that, the chance of readmission drops drastically. I can't remember exactly the numbers, but it's something like 60-70% from a very small scale study. But these are the really important social aspects that we talk about here, and that's why it has to work. We have to get people's energy bills lower, because that will help their health. That takes the strain away from the NHS. So that the societal benefits of people being able to live in a warm, dry home are massive. And that's why lobbying hard on the Warm Homes Plan, which I talked about in the previous session, is really, really hard. I'm really encouraged that will be there. But we know living in a mouldy, damp home is not good for health.
I am conscious of your time, and I greatly appreciate that you are sparing this hour to engage with me on the podcast. So I'm going to be rounding down, Jason, on my questions. Let me ask you this. Battery storage has varied technological options and applications. For you, how is this exciting, and what would you say, if you will, is the most exciting aspect of this technology?
I think the most exciting part is it unlocks the future. And actually, the bit we haven't touched on is even electric vehicles that then can, are batteries on wheels. And because the technologies are so varied and so expansive, and I've worked in, as you touched on right at the outset, biogas and generating methane from anaerobic digestion. So I've worked in that sort of gaseous area, the long duration energy storage. And again, I was reading about a project up in Loch Ness about putting more pumped hydro, and which is great when you start to think of, we generate a lot of our excess electricity up in Scotland. If we then actually can pump water and then have hydro turbines that generate the electricity, so you basically pump the water up to a high point, drop it then through turbines which generate the electricity. You pump the water up when there's excess and you generate electricity. So we already have a number of those. I worked and ran the ones in the Derwent Valley when I used to work for Severn Trent. So you look at that, you look at the work like, say, Durham are doing and Keele University with electrolyzers and creating excess hydrogen, or creating hydrogen when there's excess generation, pushing that into places. Because it's so wide and varied, and there'll be technologies we've not even thought about today that will come. But the exciting thing is it unlocks that future of a carbon-free energy system that we look at in the future. So if we don't have a way of storing energy, and we can't tell people, well, you can't cook your dinner at 6 o'clock in the evening, you've got to cook your dinner at 12 noon, and basically have it, we're not going to change people's behaviours to that extent that they only use electricity when it's being generated. We have to find ways of having electricity when people need it. And there's so many solutions and there's so many options. It's the most exciting bit, because we've seen the industry evolve over the last 5-10 years with battery chemistries alone. Thermal batteries in homes, there's just so many different options, and I think it's just incredibly exciting for the future, because we can feel it, we can touch it. Those in the sector know what this future looks like. It's lobbying hard to make sure government gets on there and really then works for all consumers alike. And if we get to that point that we say, energy bills have drastically dropped over the next 5 or 10 years, and we've got a very sustainable, low carbon based future, I think we'll all be incredibly proud of the achievements we'll have made.
I mean, absolutely proud of the work that you do and the experiences that you have garnered. Clearly it's evident from the way you marshal out your arguments and your advocacy. But let me ask you this, I would like for you, Jason, if you will, to paint a picture of the global energy mix. Say in the next 10 years, where do you see the global energy mix standing, given that you advocate a gradual shift, from fossil to renewable, and all of these, diverse options of renewable that you speak of, that you already advocate? You put all of this in a big picture. Where do you see the world in 2030 in terms of energy mix? And if you want to bring this down home to the UK.
Crystal ball time.
Tough question, right?
Tough question. Yeah, we're going to come back in 5 years and go, how close was I? Well, these prophecies. Get the crystal ball out. I think it's. I think we are going to see a more substantial renewable-based, economy. Solar, wind, tidal, all of these sort of generating capabilities. I think we will see the phasing out. We've seen the phasing out of coal. I think globally we'll start to see the phasing out of coal as well. And I think the really interesting one is nuclear. In terms of that, to provide the base load and that base capability, nuclear fission with small batch reactors that can then work locally. I think we've really got to start thinking of local community solutions, and globally that's very important. I've worked in South Africa and in communities, developing countries which don't have a grid. The solutions that are developing now aren't based on a big national grid. They're based on community-based solutions of generating electricity and utilizing that in there. But if each home becomes more sustainable from its own carbon, from its own electricity consumption and sort of generation, I think we start to take the pressure off the grid as well. So I think we're going to definitely move to a more localized energy dynamics rather than relying on this big national grid. I think as we get to more local generation, we've really got to break the grid down into those sort of smaller areas. We'll still have the grid, but I think if we can make that more localized, we don't invest the billions that's required for the national grid, and this saves that huge investment. But we have that as a backup and providing it there. But if you take it down to a micro level, if each home, each business, each factory has the capability, each car park has the capability to generate enough electricity, store it locally. So in your town where you live, in your village where you live, your street where you live, if there's enough generation going on and enough storage going on in each street, each town, each city, you start to really, concentrate that sort of that solution. So for me, based on all the different technologies that are coming, I think we'll see that the emergence of nuclear fission as to provide the base load rather than gas and previously coal. But globally, I think we'll start to see that. Then we'll start to see the renewables taking the peaks and troughs of generation with storage that come into. But like I say, break it down. Stop. For me, necessarily putting huge, we did this with power stations. We built power stations and then we concentrate the power and then we export it. We get transmission losses. We lose electricity from there. And what I don't want to see is huge generation assets, huge storage assets. I want to see them more distributed with pockets of larger, particularly outside cities and the like. But I think this more distributed energy and localized energy that almost breaks down, I think we'll have a lot more robust system that's working for everybody.
I see a resonance in what you're saying with what Paul Fenn, the president of this community choice aggregation, the founder of community choice aggregation in the United States, he told me in my last podcast. It's all about bringing power down to the communities, empowering local communities, because at the end of the day, that's how you solve the problem of energy poverty. At the end of the day, that's how you feel the real impact of sustainability, where the energy bills go down, where people have more control over their energy choices and distribution. So clearly great work that you're doing, Jason. I am going to ask you my final question so that I can let you go do other things. On this sustainable podcast, another thing we do, Jason, is to bring up messages, opportunities basically around sustainability, renewable energies, positive climate actions to individuals, to communities and businesses. So we usually put up a message that we roll in just in a minute or so, and then we round up the show.
Net zero doesn't have to be net loss. At Sustainability, we help businesses unlock clean energy solutions that cut costs, boost profits, and build brand pride. We directly connect you to opportunities for energy efficiency, product and process innovation, enhanced environmental stewardship, social value and corporate social responsibility, and much more. Contact us at hello@sustainability.co.uk or call 800 999 1340.
Yeah, so Jason, good to have you back again on the show. Thank you immensely for your time and for all of your, very, very interesting and impactful contributions. You have shared, in case you do not know, lots of very, very practical tips, and incentives for people to embrace renewable energy and for a lot more people to join your advocacy, either as businesses or as individuals or as communities. You can be sure that we do our best on this podcast to keep winning you advocates and and support base across the country. So my final question, Jason, would be this is a bit personal, right? And personal and professional, really. Let me say professionally personal. Let me take it back that way. So your work has traversed a couple of countries across the world, different sectors in climate action and sustainability, with a lot of focus on renewable energy, now battery storage. In all of these 15 years plus of your work, Jason, what impacts or accomplishments are you most proud of? And going forward, what is that big ticket achievements or accomplishments you're looking forward to achieve before say, hey, look, as a person, I think I've done my bits, I've run a good race, over to the next person?
Oh, that's the toughest question of all. I think, what have I achieved? As if you look at it in that sense, probably not a lot. In there, I keep banging the drum, and that's all I can do. This is very much about localize. Very much trying to raise the bar and spread that word around the world. Like you say, I've literally worked on every continent around the world in one industry or another. But I think that, I suppose, for me, just implementing more and more change, raising the profile of renewables, raising the profile of the environment. I've worked a large part of my career also in the water sector, and again, raising water quality. I think whatever small achievements I've made in any sense are very much around just trying to make the world slightly better. By my own personal actions, by my own professional actions, whatever industry I've been in, it's always had the environmental focus, and I've always gravitated towards the environment. Fundamentally, the Simon Sinek thing of what's your why, and the golden circle and what's your why. For me, I fundamentally care, and I care about the world we live in. I care about trying to make it as better place as I can, and each individual action, each person I convince to have a more sustainable lifestyle in whatever means that is, and whatever means they can afford. If they can't afford to invest, if they do more recycling, this is sort of lower cost. If you can make the world more sustainable and stop depleting its resources, then each individual household that's gone down that way, and I always used to say, every single battery that gets installed, every solar installation makes the world a tiny little bit better. So anything from people listening to this that makes them convinced to go down a more sustainable path, it is just a win for me. And going forward, I think it's just advocating change, advocating positive change, and really trying to get away from all the noise out there of people trying to create a distraction. Yes, we've got to have a practical lifestyle. I go on holiday. I go abroad on holiday. That's not sustainable. I'm not here to be a hypocrite and go, you shall not do anything. You shall have a vegan lifestyle that has zero impact on the planet or whatever. That's not for me, because I'm a realist. People have to enjoy life as well. That has to be part of that. But if you can look at yourself in all honesty and go, right, I've got water butts on my house. I use rainwater to water my plants. I don't have a hose pipe on my garden or anything like that, because it's not good. I do my bit here. My recycling bin is always empty. Could I have less waste in the first place? Of course I could. So there's always more you can do, but it's that pragmatic solution that just try and do the best you can. And if each individual does that from a societal impact, the world will be a better place. And so for me, keep advocating that change and trying to get people on board with that message.
I appreciate your time. I understand the sense of modesty that you portray. About 15 years of being in the sector and being in multiple countries across continents of the world. It's a lot of achievement, Jason. We cannot downplay that, but I thank you for sharing a bit of all of that with me on the Sustainable Podcast today. So there you have it, guys. We have been having an amazing conversation with Jason Howlett, the Chief Executive Officer of the Energy Storage Association here in the UK. We'll invite you to check out his profile and link to his LinkedIn. I'm sure you don't mind us sharing that on the blog of this podcast, Jason. So we invite you to show some love for nature, humanity, and society, what we call the NHS core value as sustainability. Share this podcast with your friends and your non-friends, if you like, and everyone in your network. As sustainability, we help you find the spark in your business and your community-related endeavors. Spark being sustainability strategy, policy, action plans, reporting, and communication. We'd like for you to be in touch. Send us an email, through hello@sustainability being SOS, sustainability.co.uk. And let's engage on your feedback on this edition of the podcast. And we'll see how to support each other as we move forward to create a more sustainable world that benefits everyone. Jason, thank you very much for your time. I greatly appreciate, and to all our audience, until I come your way next time on the next Sustainable Podcasts, have yourself a great time and keep making those little small steps that one way or the other help us to create a sustainable, just, equitable world for everyone. See you on the next podcast. Thank you very much, Jason.